Welcome back. All right, so this week it looks like we're going to see the hard work of Ryan Smith to bring the National Hockey League to Salt Lake City come to fruition. The Arizona Coyotes, which were valued at $500 million by Forbes in November of last year, selling for $1 billion to the National Hockey League, who then turn around and flip it for a profit to Salt Lake City for 1.2 or 1.3 billion. It sounds like it's going to be 1.2 billion, meaning that $200 million extra, that's going to be split up amongst the rest of the owners. So it's a pretty healthy profit for just saying, yeah, you can sell. Thanks. I'll take those millions of dollars and put them with my other millions and billions of dollars. But it's interesting because Alex Maruello it sounds like he's going to retain the name, the trademarks, and everything else. So the team won't be called the Coyotes. I'm going to do a video on what I think you could call a team in Utah. Keeping in mind that if you have an owner that's been trying to bring a team there for years, he's probably got an idea of what he wants the team to be called. But we'll see if there's like a public naming thing or how that works. But he's probably got an idea for what he wants them to be called. Whether or not that ends up being the team's name, that's where the question mark comes in. But Maruello retaining the team name and reportedly being given a 5-year window to potentially bring the Arizona Coyotes back. So the Arizona Coyotes would come back. Would they return to the Central? Would they end up in the Pacific? Well, that's where things get interesting because I think we could see divisions go by the wayside and just go to 2 conferences. Might make some more sense than keeping the 4 divisions if we add 4 more teams, which I can hear the groans from here. I absolutely can. I'm not even disagreeing. I'm just understanding that for the National Hockey League, they are seemingly, it seems like, ready to go into expansion mode. Because the one thing that was always said was the Arizona Coyotes and the uncertainty over the arena was holding back any hopes for expansion. You look around the NHL, and the one team that has been picked on for potential relocation outside Arizona that I've seen over the last 5-6 years would be Florida, but Florida's really healthy right now. There's no reason to think anything's going to happen with Florida anytime soon. So, if you're looking to get into the National Hockey League game as an owner, you kind of have to come in as an expansion owner. And since the expansion fee now looks like it could be $1 billion or more, the NHL has 4 billion reasons why adding 4 teams sounds pretty good. And if you're the union, well, you're adding about 100 jobs if you bring in 4 extra teams. So again, for the union, that works pretty well. And the National Hockey League is making record revenues right now. What is it, $6.2 billion in revenues? The salary cap looks like it's going to go through the roof over the next few years. So, yeah, business is pretty good. Now, at the top of the board, and the jersey I'm wearing is the Atlanta Thrashers. I don't think they're going to be called the Thrashers should they return. I'd be very, very surprised if they don't pick a brand new team name. Now, this will be the 3rd go around for Atlanta. The first time they left Atlanta, moved to Calgary as the Flames, it was attendance. The attendance was abysmal. They tried everything they could to make it work. It just did not. The second time around, it was there was money losses, but it was also bad ownership. Bad ownership, and then they lost the building. So not dissimilar from the Arizona Coyotes. The Atlanta Thrashers lose the building. Now we're getting 2 competing bids for basically the same idea, bringing a team to Atlanta. And, of course, most recently, Anson Carter heading up one of those 2 bids. Now, I don't know which division they end up in, so I was trying to think this through with, like, where would they end up. And this is where I think maybe just getting rid of divisions and just going with conferences could make more sense. And from a scheduling standpoint, it might make things a little easier, too. But Atlanta clearly should be in the Atlantic, but again, if all 4 of these ended up being the teams that come in, you can't not have Quebec in the Atlantic. So we'll talk about Quebec. But Atlanta I've got at the top of the board because it feels like that's a certainty. Atlanta's coming in. The one thing I wonder is, so you're going to have to bring in 1 Western and 1 Eastern team at a time. I would be very surprised if they don't bring in 2 teams together. Traditionally, if you look at expansion, it has happened where they bring in 2 teams at a time, going back as far as Buffalo and Vancouver, Washington and the Islanders. You've got Ottawa and Tampa, Florida and Anaheim, Columbus and Minnesota. So there are definitely instances of the NHL bringing in 2 teams at a time. The one thing that I wonder is, would the National Hockey League, with expansion, want it to be Atlanta and Phoenix to start things off? because you're saying we're going to expand. Look at this. This is going to be great, and you're going back to two markets where it failed previously. So I think that, I mean, for the National Hockey League, that may not be a big deal, but just personally looking at it from the outside as a fan, I think it's not the most exciting of announcements if it's Atlanta and Phoenix that are coming in. But is it a bad idea? Maybe, maybe not. And again, with the Coyotes, should they come back in 5 years' time with a brand new arena, if they get that whole district in Phoenix, which Maruello is reportedly still wanting to buy, who knows, right? The one thing with Maruello is by selling the team for $1 billion, he makes a really hefty profit on a team that, whether you think his ownership ended up causing the team to leave or not, basically from 2019 until now, it just didn't work, and there were all kinds of rumors about toxic work environments, everything Arizona related. Now he's getting a huge profit. If he turns around and says, you know what, I don't know, I don't think this is going to work, or if something comes up with the bid, because the NHL reportedly went to him and said, can you guarantee this is going to work? And he said no. Because he can't guarantee in a bidding process. He cannot stand there and look him in the eye and guarantee that it's going to work. So the NHL says fine, and so he has a 5-year window to bring the Arizona Coyotes back as an expansion team. And so you got to think, if it's a 5-year window, it's a 5-year window to get a team in Atlanta as well. But I do just wonder, like, do you want it to be Atlanta and Arizona, or would you want there to be another Eastern-based team? The problem really is that the other reported locations that they were looking at, or there's been interest, unless Omaha shouldn't be in the East either. Cincinnati's not on the board. I didn't put them on the board, but there's been reportedly interest there. Well, they don't belong in the East either, right? Or do they? I guess they could, with Columbus, and they'd go right into the Metro. But Houston, there's been a lot of talk around Houston for years, and serious talks between the NHL and the owner of the Houston Rockets have been reported as recently as February. So the NHL has been sitting down for years with the owner of the Houston Rockets and saying, so the NHL not saying no to Houston. It sounds like Houston, huge market, obviously have the natural rivalry with Dallas. They'd have to go into the Central. So Kansas City, right? Kansas City, there's been talk for years. They have a building. The question becomes, who's going to be the owner? That's a legitimate question. Although in 2023, so last year, once the Tempe project fell apart because they voted it down in Arizona, there were rumors they could be moved to Kansas City. Packed up and moved to Kansas City. Because there's an arena there, and then it's just a matter of which owner. But members of the Chiefs, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, you may have heard of them, very vocal and very supportive of the idea of a National Hockey League team in Kansas City. Now, the NHL's been in Kansas City before, but that was only for 2 years in the 70s. So I don't think anybody in Kansas City would really have like all kinds of memories about the Kansas City Scouts. I think it'd be a brand new team name, and so it can work. The question then becomes one of, so I mean, again, that's a central location, same as Houston. So again, do you look at that and go, well, we'd have to move somebody else to the Pacific, or do you just say, you know what, we'll have West, we'll have East, and just get rid of the divisions altogether? I think that's a more reasonable solution, to be honest. I think that works better than just moving guys around from divisions, between divisions all the time. So obviously the NHL has interest in Houston, and that interest is mutual. Kansas City has interest in the National Hockey League. The NHL, I don't think, is opposed to Kansas City. And then you get into just the absolute fireball that is the idea of bringing back the Quebec Nordiques, because there are some very vocal opinions that the NHL will never go back to Quebec City. They have no interest in going back to Quebec City. It won't happen. And then those that say, look, you have to go back to Quebec City. You have to. This is a location where hockey will work. Hockey can work. And it's not always just about creating new fans. It's about rewarding fans for, sticking with it. And you still see Nordiques gear everywhere. So the one side, and I've mentioned this before, if you're a Nordiques fan and you're buying that gear, well, the NHL's already getting your money without giving you what you want. So that is like the cynical way of looking at it, that the NHL's making money off the name of the Quebec Nordiques. And they do the same with the Seals, although San Jose has kind of taken up the mantle of being what the Seals were. And so there are various franchises that have moved, and the NHL doesn't mind making gear for them and selling it at a profit. But it doesn't necessarily mean the team's going back there. Now, the government in Quebec City, have been very vocal about wanting a team back, but some of that may just be for political points. Oh, my ratings are sagging. I'll come out publicly and talk about how we need the Nordiques back. Maybe I'll give Bettman a call, this kind of thing. And while Bettman's been pleasant, I don't think there's a lot of desire from the Board of Governors to go back to Quebec City. Years back, Jeremy Jacobs, I reported on, owner of the Boston Bruins, saying we don't want to go to Quebec, basically, that it's too small a market, it's not going to create new fans. He just didn't see the point going back to Quebec City. And again, is he wrong? We can all have that debate, but the reality is that if the Board of Governors share that opinion, then even if Bettman was saying, oh yeah, we should be back in Quebec City, he'd get pushback from the Board of Governors on that as it stands right now. So Quebecor could still end up being an owner potentially if the Nordiques come back, but keep in mind that $1 billion expansion fees in US dollars, meaning it's about 1.3 billion Canadian, and that might be a little bit hefty of a fee for them to consider at this point. It's a lot of money, and obviously if we're looking at divisions, they'd have to be in the Atlantic. They have to be in the same division as Montreal, Toronto, preferably Boston, preferably Hartford. I'm mentioning Hartford. I know people are going to mention Hartford. The reality is that I understand that the governor of Connecticut wanted to bring the team back, but they don't have the NHL level arena that's needed with all those private boxes and all the corporate dollars. And corporate dollars are part of the reason why the Quebec Nordiques are not seen as being as viable as others. You're not going to have the corporate support in Quebec City that you're going to get in Kansas City, Houston, Atlanta, even potentially in Phoenix. And again, we've talked about how Phoenix struggled to make money and lost money through most of their time there. So going back to Quebec City, and I'm 100% in support. I was a huge Nordiques fan. When they moved to Colorado, I was ticked off because they were finally a good team, and then they got picked up and moved. So for Arizona fans that are feeling that way right now, like, oh good, the Coyotes look like they have a strong future, and now they're leaving, that's how it was with Quebec City. The difference being Quebec City had a couple of really good regular seasons, and then they were gone. So it will be interesting to see how the NHL does this. It'll be interesting to see where they go, but they seem to be going towards more familiar locations, ones they've been in before. In all of these cases, there's been NHL teams there with the exception of Houston, but Houston, of course, was in the WHA, and at one point was going to join the NHL, and then nope. So the WHA merger with the NHL I've talked about before. I may have to do another video on that again because it's fascinating how the NHL really hated the WHA and just made sure when the WHA went under and teams joined the NHL, they punished them because these were the teams that had driven up costs for the NHL owners, that had been paying these exorbitant amounts of money on contracts and guaranteeing contracts and allowing players to be traded and all these things, just giving players more freedom, which National Hockey League owners really weren't fans of. So they punished the WHA when it went under for having the nerve to pay players a fair amount of money and all that fun stuff. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always and how you think they should handle this, because it does feel like they're going to add expansion teams. It does feel like it's going to end up being 4. I mean, you could add 2, 1 to each conference, and then just make them conferences instead of divisions. That could absolutely work. So again, I understand the whole shooting the messenger part, but I ask you not to, because I'm just saying this is the road they seem to be heading down. It is interesting that of the locations, there's only one that the National Hockey League hasn't been in before. But I mean, they're familiar haunts. You already know that you can fill a building in Atlanta if you do this right. I think you could fill a building in Phoenix. Stop laughing. I think you could fill a building in Phoenix if it's done right. And obviously, I think Houston can work, and we know Quebec City will work. I don't think there's any doubt from anybody in the National Hockey League that you can fill a building in Quebec City. The question becomes, can you generate the amount of money, the amount of revenue, both from tickets as well as the corporate? The corporate dollars are big to keep in mind. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.